What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some reasons why you probably don't want the Samsung Galaxy A04s. Now, on one hand, don't get me wrong, for what it is, this is actually a pretty decent phone, and if you're looking for an affordable device for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, maybe watching the occasional video every now and then, and you like to take a lot of pictures because this phone does have a really good camera, then honestly, in that case, it might actually be a pretty decent choice for you. But that being said, this phone does have lots of drawbacks, so I'm going to be going over some of my least favorite things about it to give you a better idea of what you can expect if you get it. Now, as always, if you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So my first reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is the 720p display. Now, with this phone, we are getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with the 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So with this display, on one hand, it's really not all bad. At 6.5 inches, it's definitely decently large, and the 20:9 aspect ratio is giving us a nice tall, narrow form factor. So if you're doing stuff like reading, web browsing, some light social media, and even watching the occasional video every now and then, for an entry-level phone at least, you probably will get a decent experience. And the 90Hz refresh rate also makes the movement on the screen a bit faster and smoother, so when you're just using the phone in general, it's going to feel a bit more premium. But that being said, still, with the 720p resolution, you can only really expect so much. So if you're really consuming a lot of content, especially stuff like videos, where you might want the actual image quality to be quite a bit better, in that kind of situation, you're probably going to want to go with something that has a 1080p resolution instead. And unfortunately, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, again, we're only getting a 720p resolution, and it's really too bad because at this point in 2023, I was hoping that we were really going to start to see more 1080p resolutions and more entry-level phones like this. But so far, that just doesn't seem to be the case. So in general, if you are looking for a phone that has a really nice looking image and you're really consuming a lot of content, then although this phone really isn't terrible for that, you still might want to consider something else. My second reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is because it doesn't have an ultra-wide camera. Now, like I kind of mentioned before, for the most part, this phone actually does have a really good camera setup. Up front here, for the selfie camera, we got a typical water drop notch. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, for what it is, the camera setup here is pretty decent, and when it comes to actual photo quality, I was actually really impressed with the pictures this phone takes. That being said though, again, this phone doesn't have an ultra wide camera, and at this point in 2023, that's really too bad because so many other phones have it. I mean, even phones that are a lot cheaper than this one do. So overall, an ultra wide camera really is not a hard feature to come by, and if you're taking a lot of pictures, it can really come in handy. So if you are someone who likes to take a lot of pictures, and you do value having that wider angle, then keep in mind, not only are you probably going to be disappointed here, but if you really want an ultra wide camera, even in this price range, you can easily find a phone that has one. Now, my third reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is the cheap materials. Now, on one hand, I feel like most people are probably going to be using a case anyway, so this one probably doesn't matter a whole lot, but I really do want to point out with this phone, even for an entry-level phone, the materials feel honestly cheaper than usual. Like most phones in this price range, aside from the glass display, the A04s is made entirely of plastic, but compared to a lot of phones, this plastic honestly just feels pretty cheap. The phone doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it, and while it doesn't really feel like it's about to fall apart or anything, if you do tend to value quality materials, then just keep in mind, when it comes to the design of this phone, I would say in general, it's really just not Samsung's best work. My fourth reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is because it doesn't have NFC. Now, this is honestly kind of a big one for me because I personally use tap and pay all the time, and at this point in 2023, with contactless mobile payment services becoming more and more popular and widely used, I feel like pretty much every phone should have NFC. It's honestly just an expectation at this point, especially considering I've seen like carrier branded phones that are much lower end than this that still have NFC, whereas unfortunately for whatever reason, this phone, despite I guess technically being a slightly higher end low end phone, if that term even makes sense, still doesn't have NFC. So keep in mind, if you do like to use tap and pay, you're probably going to want to go for something else because you won't be able to do that with this phone. My fifth reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is the processor. Now, honestly, I was kind of debating whether or not I should even mention this because when it comes to actual performance, for an entry-level phone, it's pretty much exactly what you would expect. But with this phone, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. And really the biggest letdown here is that compared to the Samsung Galaxy A03s, this phone's predecessor, the performance is pretty much exactly the same. And I feel like, sure, I don't really expect this phone to be crazy fast. It is a really entry-level, affordable device, and it's not really meant for heavy use use in basic activities, but at the same time, it would have been nice to see at least a bit of an increase in performance, because otherwise, why even bother using a different processor? Now overall, again, if you're doing really basic activities like some light web browsing and social media, maybe listening to music, taking pictures, and watching the occasional video every now and then, it will still get the job done. And again, when you get an entry-level phone, performance-wise, I know you really can't expect that much from it, but at the same time, it would have been nice to see at least somewhat of an improvement, whereas with this phone, even for what it is still pretty mediocre. My sixth reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is because for some reason it doesn't have screen recording. Now, this is probably not really going to be a big deal for very many people, but I just thought it was weird that with this phone, for whatever reason, despite screen recording being such a simple feature, pretty much as basic as a screenshot, for some reason they just left it out. Now, if you don't believe me, which I didn't believe it at first either, if we pull down the quick menu to take a look at where screen recording usually is supposed to be, as you can see, it's not here. And even if you go to that other features section, as you can see, still you can't even add screen recording to the quick menu. So yeah, unfortunately this phone doesn't have it. Now, I've never even tried to find a third-party screen recording app because most phones already have it, so I've never needed to. So I'm sure there's something out there if you really want to get a screen recording, but really just on the principle of it, Samsung leaving out such a basic feature just feels weird to me. So just keep in mind, if you get this phone wondering where the screen recording is, as far as I know, this phone, or at least the version of it in my hand, doesn't have it. And finally, my seventh reason why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s is because it doesn't have wireless charging. Now, on one hand, if you're really familiar with entry-level phones like this, you're probably going to know pretty much no phone like this, especially a Samsung Galaxy A series phone, is going to have wireless charging anyway. But honestly, I still don't really know why. Wireless charging is such a basic feature. I mean, I've seen the $100 Visible Midnight that does have wireless charging, and that phone is honestly even lower end than this one. So it's not like they can't implement it. It's just that for some reason, only flagship phones seem to have it. Now, again, this is probably not really that big a deal, just because wireless charging isn't exactly a feature people really care that much about anyway. But that being said, it still is a nice feature to have, especially in lower end phones like this, because say your charging port breaks. If that happens with this phone, you basically either have to pay to fix it or just get a whole new phone, whereas with wireless charging, you can keep it a little bit longer while still being able to charge it. So in general, it is still disappointing that lower end phones like this don't have wireless charging. And of course, if you're coming from an older flagship phone, for example, and you're expecting every phone in 2023 to have wireless charging at this point, which, to be fair, is not really a crazy assumption either. Just keep in mind, most phones that aren't flagship phones don't have wireless charging, so if you are expecting that with this phone, you will be disappointed. But those were my reasons why you might not want the Samsung Galaxy A04s. In general, despite some drawbacks, if you are looking for a more basic device that has a really large battery, a good amount of storage, and a really nice camera that takes great photos, then in that case, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A04s is still worth considering. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow A04s Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.